Next day, we move on to my team, the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings had an altogether underwhelming season in 2020, finishing third in the NFC North with a 7-9 record. For much of the season, the team were shambolic on defence, which is not something fans have been accustomed to during the tenure of head coach Mike Zimmer. All three levels struggled. The line was not generating enough pressure nor stopping the run, which shouldn't really have come as a surprise to anyone given the losses of free agents Everson Griffin and Linval Joseph, while Daniel Hunter and Michael Pierce didn't play a snap due to injury and COVID, respectively. The linebacking unit also struggled with injury. Barr and Kendricks got hurt during the year, while the cornerback group, comprised primarily of rookies, was always going to struggle with opposing quarterbacks having as much time to find the pass as they did. On the other side of the ball, the O-line was calamitous at times. Listeners may remember that on the podcast last year, we carried a special segment called Drew Watch, where we provided updates on the worst guard in the National Football League. Somehow he's still on the roster, so good for him. The Vikings go into this year's draft with 11 picks, though most of these come on day 3. They have the 14th overall selection, 2 thirds, 4 fourths, 2 fifths, and 2 sixths. The team basically traded back from the second to the third round in order to rent Yannick Ngakoue for 6 games. While that doesn't look like the best piece of business now, you have to give a front office some credit for realising their mistake and cutting the loss. The Vikings will do one of 3 things with their 14th overall pick in the first round. They'll either take a defensive end, take a defensive lineman, or trade back. As mentioned, the O-line has been abysmal for several years now. Aside from overpaying Riley Reef and Mike Remmers and dropping a couple of day 2 picks here and there, Zimmer and Spielman have neglected and underinvested in the unit. A sizable proportion of a fan base would urge that this is addressed in round 1 of the draft, but I'd argue that the team has got to be cautious here. Ezra Cleveland was drafted as a left tackle, though through necessity has found his way over to right guard, where he's performed relatively well. All the noises coming from the organisation and from Paul Allen suggest that's where he'll stay, and that a move back to left tackle isn't favoured. This would leave a huge need at left tackle, as current de facto starter Rashad Hill should be limited to operating as a swing backup at best. Now, there are 2 offensive tackles who may be available at 14 who wouldn't be considered reaches, and that's Christian Darrisaw and Rashawn Slater. Darrisaw would be a great selection. He'd instantly address the team's need on the blind side and be a day 1 starter. Slater, on the other hand, while talented, probably does not have a wingspan to be an effective tackle in the National Football League. At 6'3", he's undersized for the position, and I feel almost certain that any team that drafts him will eventually move him to the interior sooner rather than later. Now, while the Vikings certainly do need an upgrade at guard, it's quite rich to spend a first rounder on one, especially given the team's other needs. If Darrisaw is gone, the Vikings should be looking at picking up a defensive end instead. Even if Daniel Hunter returns to this team with his play at the same level as before his neck injury, last season proved that there is no one on the roster deserving to partner him. My point here is that in the absolute best case scenario, this team is already a starter short at defensive end. As a fan, I'd love Hunter to come back fit, healthy and happy, but it's far from guaranteed. Due to this uncertainty around Hunter, I'd argue that finding a defensive end is just as pressing as finding a tackle, if not more so. It's quite possible that the Vikings could have the first bite at the position at 14th, taking their pick of Kwity Paye or Jalen Phillips. The tackle class, it should be noted, is extremely deep, and starting caliber players are likely to still be found quite late on day 2, which may not be the case for defensive end. So finally, the third option, Spielman may trade back, but these things are hard to predict, so I'm not going to speculate on that. So let's assume that the team addresses left tackle and defensive end with their first 2 picks, one way or the other, first round and third round. Beyond this, further work is needed on the O-line, especially the interior. The very fact that Drew Samia got on the field at all last season tells you everything you need to know about the depth. To round out the offense, I like Chad Beebe and BC Johnson, but I'm still not convinced that either is the answer to the elusive third wide receiver conundrum. On the other side of the ball, after defensive end is addressed, depth is required throughout the linebacker and secondary units. A fair few new starters were brought in during free agency, notably Xavier Woods and Patrick Peterson. I'm not too convinced on new signing Nick Vigil starting at weak side linebacker, but realistically there are more pressing needs for the team to deal with first. So, to sum things up, the analysis that I've given you here is all well and good, but true Vikings fans will know how things will really go down on draft night. Will Zimmer take Surtain or Horn at 14th overall? Can't wait to see our new cornerback. Skol Vikings.